Welcome to the Spring 2023 Filament Health Virtual Investor Update. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined. We're just going to give a few more minutes to people to sign on, and then we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Maybe we're going to give it one, maybe 2 more minutes. There's a lot of people joining up at the moment, so thank you again to those that have joined Filament Health. In case you're wondering where you are, this is the Filament Health Spring 2023 Virtual Investor Update. All right, I think we'll get started. Once again, thank you to everyone who has joined, and specifically to the members of the board of Filament Health and the rest of the management team, and obviously all of our amazing investors, shareholders, and supporters. My name is Ben Lightburn. I'm CEO and co-founder of Filament Health. With me in the room is Anna Corden, our Director of Communications. Just a quick agenda for today. After these brief opening remarks, we'll be playing a video like we did last time, highlighting some of our recent accomplishments and outlook on the future. Then we'll bring it back for a live Q&A. We have some questions that have already been submitted by folks as well. Just like last meeting, we asked that people submit questions using the built-in Google Meets question functionality. There should be a logo on the bottom of your screen with a little circle, square, and triangle. If you could please submit your questions through there, and we will get them answered live for you. Once again, that's the question functionality through the Google Meet software. Last time it took a while for people to figure out how to use that, so I'm just trying to emphasize that point. With that, we're going to get started with a video like I mentioned, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
I'm Ben Lightburn, the CEO and co-founder of Filament Health. Filament Health is a natural psychedelic drug development company. We extract powerful botanical compounds from psychoactive plants and fungi and turn them into standardized drugs. As the mental health crisis continues to grow, our mission to see safe, natural psychedelics in the hands of everyone who needs them has never been more important, and we are doing everything in our power to ensure that people suffering from treatable conditions will have access to these healing compounds as soon as possible. 2022 was a year of significant progress for Filament. We established ourselves as a highly sought-after partner in the psychedelic industry and a leader in botanical psychedelic drug development. Our strategy of out-licensing our botanical psilocybin drug candidate, PEX-10, to our partner network continued. We announced several new partnerships, including a commercial licensing agreement with Science Group to provide PEX-10 for palliative care, and a supply agreement with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health Canada's largest mental health institution. In September, we announced that 14 subjects were dosed with our psilocybin in a Health Canada approved clinical trial run by our partner Atma Journey Centers. All participants reported very positive results. Filament's research and development also progressed through 2022 at an impressive rate. Excellence in our laboratory continued with the formulation of standardized botanical ayahuasca, an industry first. Our intellectual property portfolio grew with several new patent issuances from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, bringing Filament's total number of patents to 14. We ended the year with cash and cash equivalents of $2.8 million and approximately $400,000 of revenue.
As we entered 2023, Filament had a number of early successes. We announced new supply partnerships with Psychiatric Center Copenhagen for alcohol use disorder and with CAMH for a trial studying mild cognitive impairment. Exporting psilocybin to Denmark represented a significant regulatory lift for our team, and we were pleased with our success in partnering with the European Medicine Agency. We also signed on to a joint venture to create Magdalena Biosciences in partnership with Jaguar Health, with $1 million in funding from One Small Planet. Magdalena is a development company specializing in novel, natural prescription medicines derived from plants for mental health indications. The implied value of Filament's ownership of Magdalena represents $2 million. In March, we announced FDA approval for clinical trials at the University of California, San Francisco, studying our botanical psilocybin for methamphetamine use disorder. This trial represents the first study of a natural psilocybin drug candidate for methamphetamine use disorder. Soon after, we announced the manufacture and release of GMP-compliant MDMA capsules to serve a significant need in both Canada and abroad. Health Canada's Special Access Program remains the only way for patients to access psilocybin outside of clinical trials. Filament is currently the only provider for psilocybin for the SAP. No other psilocybin has been given to patients since June of 2022. We donate not only our drug product, but hours of our team's time each week to help facilitate much needed access for patients who are critically ill. We do this because we believe in the importance of access to psilocybin, as well as to establish prescriber and patient networks, build relationships with health authorities, and to gain feedback on real-world application of our drugs. As of May 1st, 89 patients have been approved to receive our botanical psilocybin through the SAP, and 43 have been dosed at least once. This means that Filament Health is the only company currently supplying legal psilocybin to patients anywhere in North America. Our efforts to support psilocybin research are also growing steadily. All of Filament's hard work has not gone unnoticed. In recent months, we've been featured in the Globe and Mail, Maclean's magazine, on Global News Radio, and on CTV. This media coverage has had a positive impact on our share price performance, in addition to raising our public profile. Our profile continues to grow with high caliber event appearances as well. In March, our CEO, Ben, was asked to speak at South by Southwest, a prestigious event in Austin, Texas, which spotlights innovators across industries. Last week, he presented at the Psychedelic Therapeutics and Drug Development Conference in San Francisco, and next month, he will speak at MAPS Psychedelic Science in Denver.
Looking ahead, our strategy will emphasize three key areas: drug development, our partner network, and new markets. We recently received early safety data from our phase 1 clinical trial at UCSF. All of our drugs have so far been well tolerated, and all of the participants achieved full mystical experiences, which is what is associated with therapeutic outcomes. We have sharpened the focus of our clinical programs into substance use disorders. This is due to a very large unmet need. Methamphetamine use disorder affects 1.6 million people in the US, and opioid use disorder affects over 16 million people worldwide. Both of these conditions cause significant harm to those suffering from them and to society at large. The overall substance use disorder market was valued at $35 billion US in 2021 and is expected to grow to $60 billion by 2029. In these indications, there are also clear endpoints with substance use disorders, compared to multifactorial mental health conditions like depression, where outcomes can be difficult to measure. We have received a phase 2 clinical trial authorization from US FDA to study methamphetamine use disorder with PEX-10 at UCSF. We intend to continue to leverage the advantages of botanical drugs. This allows us to take a development fast track, skipping lengthy and expensive IND-enabling studies in many cases. Our laboratory and extraction expertise, which has shown remarkable success with fungi, is now turned to the standardization of psychoactive plants and cacti, such as iboga and San Pedro. We will continue to strategically out-license PEX-10 for indications which are not Filament's internal focus, such as with our commercial partnership with Science for palliative care. As we advance our drug development programs, we will be able to out-license to our customers at later stages in the drug development cycle and for greater consideration. We also intend to continue growing our academic supply network, and we're pleased to provide psilocybin to these institutions to further psychedelic research. These partnerships provide Filament with exclusive access to clinical data in new indications, which we may then develop further ourselves. We also help to alleviate industry-wide supply shortages. Finally, we will ensure that Filament is represented in new markets where significant revenue opportunities and first-mover advantages exist in both pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical markets. Several jurisdictions have enabled pre-marketing authorization distribution of drugs on a limited basis, including Canada and Australia. In Canada, we will continue to donate our drug candidates and our time to the Health Canada Special Access Program. Beginning July 1, Australia will reschedule psilocybin and MDMA, making them eligible for distribution via the Authorized Prescriber Scheme, a program whereby psychiatrists can obtain permission to prescribe these substances for certain indications. Filament is in active discussions with the TGA, the Australian equivalent of FDA, and local distributors, as we believe our products are ideal candidates for this scheme. We are also in discussions with FDA about expanded access. Stay tuned for more news in this regard as it develops. All of these areas offer opportunities to establish prescriber and patient networks, build relationships with health authorities, and gain feedback on real-world applications of our drugs, and most importantly, the opportunity to treat patients. Non-pharmaceutical markets are also arriving sooner than expected. In Oregon, state-level legalization came into effect in January of this year, and only natural psilocybin products are permitted. Filament has executed a licensing agreement with a local party who will distribute products made using our technology. In Colorado, legalization is expected in 12 to 18 months, following a ballot measure which passed in November 2022. We intend to play a role in this market, which will also be natural only. Regulatory attitudes in the US are improving, and several more states have various bills and ballot measures which are progressing. All of this means that Filament can gain exposure to regulatory changes permitting legal sales. It is a privilege to be supported by so many great shareholders and investors. With your support, we have established ourselves as the leading supplier of pharmaceutical-grade psilocybin for research and commercial development. Our botanical approach allows us to reap unusual benefits in terms of IP, clinical development, consumer preference, and cost. 18 months ago, there were no approved clinical trials using natural psilocybin. Now there are 20 and counting, both academic and revenue generating, all of which are using Filament's products. With our new internal focus on substance use disorders and continued benefits from our botanical approach, Filament is well positioned to take advantage of both the pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical psychedelics markets as they rapidly emerge. We thank you for your time, attention, and most of all, for your continued support. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to the team who put together that great video. And we're looking forward to answering your questions in the Q&A. Reminder that we're using the built-in Google Meets question functionality hidden behind the little icon with the circle, square, and the triangle. Before we get into the Q&A, I want to just make a quick statement about something relatively unfortunate that happened recently. We are all very distressed to learn about the passing of one of our co-founders, Tom Kinoshenko. I want to take a minute just to acknowledge his contributions to Filament. He was there right from the beginning and shared our vision to bring safe, natural psychedelics to all in need as soon as possible. We wish his family and everyone involved all the best. Okay.
Okay. Moving on to questions. So we did receive a few questions in advance, which I will begin with while we wait for some questions to come through the functionality at the bottom right. So let's start with, could you provide more information about Filament's plans for the Australian market?
Sure. So Australia, much to everyone's surprise, in February announced that they will be rescheduling psilocybin from Schedule 9, where it currently is, to Schedule 8. And this makes psilocybin eligible for something called the Authorized Prescriber Scheme in Australia. It's kind of similar to the Health Canada Special Access Program, with one big exception, is that in Australia it will be physicians, psychiatrists that can apply to be part of this program. And once they're approved, they can now prescribe psilocybin for depression. So this is obviously very exciting. We think that our natural drug candidates, which are obviously in many different clinical trials all around the world, will be very attractive for this program. And so we've been having conversations with a number of different Australian parties in order to get this program set up. It's not going to be a huge, overwhelming, vast market right from day one. Similarly to with SAP in Canada, it is going to take some time for things to get set up, for all the paperwork and import permits and all these different kind of logistical challenges to work their way through. But nonetheless, it's very exciting because it is a kind of legal pre-authorization pharmaceutical market. This contrasts it a little bit to what's going on in the United States with Oregon and Colorado. Oregon and Colorado are markets that are essentially separate from the pharmaceutical market, outside of the FDA's jurisdiction. In Oregon, as a reminder, we've signed a licensing agreement with a local manufacturing partner who can make and distribute our products, or at least products made with our technology under license. And we'll plan to do the same thing in Colorado. One of the fascinating things about the Colorado and Oregon markets is that they are so far actually natural only. So synthetic products are prohibited in those markets. And we don't yet know exactly what the requirements will be for Australia. We are actually in active discussion with the TGA, who's a regulator down there. So I think in terms of rescheduling and legalization, if you had asked me a year or two ago if we would be, have already 100 patients approved for the SAP and have Australia rescheduling in 2 states, I maybe wouldn't have called you crazy, but I would have been surprised if it had come to pass this quickly.
Okay, great. We have a question through the chat from Soren. Do you find any regulatory agencies to be more difficult to deal with than others?
They're all fantastic. I would say we haven't really had a difficult experience with any regulator so far as it pertains to getting our drugs approved and administered into clinical trials. I think in general, they are all relatively supportive. They are all relatively available for communication. We've had a number of discussions with Health Canada, FDA, TGA, and correspondence with MHRA in the UK and other agencies in Europe. Look, if they were against what we were doing, they would be making our lives a lot more difficult, because that's certainly within their power. So in terms, I don't want to say they're all easy, but we haven't had any particular challenges from any of them. That's what I will say.
Okay. Right, another question that was sent in initially. Why should I invest in Filament right now?
Well, I think you should invest in Filament all the time, frankly. But we have a lot of exciting things on the roadmap. As we mentioned in the video, we recently decided to sharpen the focus of our drug development program in substance use disorders. And in connection with that, we have a phase 2 human clinical trial approved by the FDA and by the review board of UCSF that will hopefully get started in the next little while. We're excited about this trial because stimulant use disorder, of which methamphetamine use disorder is a subcategory, has no currently approved treatments. It's a very high area of unmet need. I mean, It's very obvious to anyone reading the news that substance use disorders in general are causing a lot of harm to society and a lot of anguish for patients and their families. And we think that our botanical drug candidates have a very good chance of showing efficacy in these indications. In addition to methamphetamine use disorder, we would then therefore be looking at prescription stimulant misuse disorder, as well as potentially cocaine use disorder. These are different indications that share similar, if not identical, mechanisms of action. So that's, I think, the one thing that can really set us apart as a full drug developing company. And in addition, we will expect to see more and more licensing agreements that we sign along the way. These allow us to essentially generate revenue from indications which may not be in our development focus, right? We develop a lot of great partnerships, like we have with the science group for the treatment of palliative care. We're going to expect to see more and more of those come through. And again, like I mentioned in the previous question, or 2 questions ago, these new markets that are arriving sooner than expected. We don't know exactly what will be the revenue magnitude of something like the Australian Authorized Prescriber Scheme, but it could be very, very positive for us. So all of which are reasons and more to invest in Filament.
Okay. We have a question through the chat from Narun. What is Filament's plan / timeline / confidence level for getting botanical drug approval from the FDA, given that only 2 have been approved to date by TC and Verigen?
Well, there's actually a third that was approved not too long ago. I forget its name, but it was a pineapple product. It's well known that there have been only a very few botanical drugs that have been approved by FDA. There's been more in Europe and obviously way more in Asia. The differences of getting a botanical drug approved or developed are primarily in the earlier stages of development. The later stages of development are fairly similar to a standard drug. And so you can draw a typical timeline as we're just entering into phase 2 for various indications, draw similar conclusions to what you would draw for typical drugs in order to get those approved. I think one of the reasons why botanical drugs have been, underutilized is mostly that the pharmaceutical industry, specifically in North America, is very, very synthetically focused. And the other factor is that the FDA botanical drug guidance was only really kind of finished and formalized in 2016. And that was done after the approval of one of the other botanical drugs, crofelemer, was approved. So there hasn't really been a good playbook for companies to go by. And even now that there is, it's because it's all about botanical extracts and growing regions and things that are really totally foreign to any kind of traditional pharmaceutical chemist.
All right. We had an initial question sent in from Ben Elliott. He asked, what are the current cash levels, burn rate, and strategy for funding needs?
I think I'll probably turn that question over to Warren Duncan, our CFO, who's phoning in from Toronto.
Hello, everyone. Our Q1 financial statements listed on SEDAR disclosed a cash balance as of March 31st of $2.3 million. Without saying too much, I'll say we're in touch with current and prospective new investors and continue to evaluate financing opportunities that we feel would be in the best interest of current shareholders. I think that's safe for now.
Okay. Ben had another question for us, which is, what is the vision and timeline to becoming self-sustaining, i.e. not requiring external capital?
Great question. We did almost $400,000 of revenue last year in 2022, and we expect that to keep growing over time. Realistically, I would expect cash flow positive not until either we have a drug approved or one of our licensees has a drug approved, because that's really when the milestones and royalties really would kick into high gear. But nonetheless, all of the revenue that we can achieve now really it really helps with dilution, right? It means we have to raise less money out on the market. So, I mean, hopefully in a few years, maybe when one of these drugs gets approved, maybe before that, can we expect to be cash flow positive.
We have an interesting question from Soren. Did you look into using mushrooms to treat pain in animals?
It's an interesting question. We haven't internally, although we have talked to researchers who are looking at that field. We've also been chatting with a number of groups that are focused on chronic pain in humans. That's been an interesting field of study as it pertains to psilocybin. And I think we've even provided our drugs to some academic studies that are investigating the use of our drugs for chronic pain in humans.
Okay, great. You've shared lots of positive progress, but how will it improve Filament's share price? Are your competitors experiencing similar difficulties in public markets right now?
Well, the last part of that question, yes. The psychedelics market continues to be a relatively tough place to be. Although I will say that recently, in the last month or two, we have had a fair amount of press and recognition of some of our efforts in the media, and that did have certainly a positive contribution to our trading volumes and share price performance. Specifically, there was an article in the Globe and Mail that came out maybe about a month ago now about primarily about the fact that we had manufactured GMP grade capsules of MDMA on behalf of one of our partners. But also the article just went into all aspects of our daily life and included a really funny picture of me holding a tray of mushrooms surrounded by mescaline containing cacti and capsules of MDMA. So no wonder it had a good impact on our share price. That was followed by some live interviews on CTV, et cetera, et cetera. So we are starting to see some glimmers of hope, I think, in the psychedelics market. Some other psychedelics companies have seen some pretty good activity in the last month or two. Obviously, the overall market, NASDAQ, and et cetera, are up on the year. So too early to tell, but I think that it's definitely a much more positive situation than it was 6 months ago.
Great. Okay. Why are you focusing on substance use disorder? What's included in that market?
So we are focused on substance use disorders for a few different reasons. Number one is the very high unmet need, right? As I mentioned, for the stimulant use disorders, there are no approved therapies at the moment. And for opioid use disorder, many of the existing therapies, primarily substitution therapy, so methadone and related treatments, have a number of disadvantages and poor retention. So we think that we can vastly improve patient outcomes with our botanical psychedelic drug candidates. And obviously, these represent very big financial opportunities. Another interesting thing about substance use disorders is that they can be easier to measure in clinical trials rather than with other indications such as depression. You can measure whether there are drugs in someone's system with various tests, and you don't have to rely totally on surveys. This is also an area where FDA has issued guidance in certain areas, like in the area of opioid use disorder. In stimulant use disorder, there's not much guidance out there from FDA, and that's primarily because there are no existing therapies. So there are no really, we have to blaze our own trail, which again speaks to the magnitude of the potential opportunity. Lastly, I'll say that our partners at UCSF, Dr. Woolley, the PI of our human studies down there, this is an area where he's very excited to get going with research, and we have the full support of UCSF and FDA because they've approved the clinical trial down there already.
Great. Okay. how does a large network of research partners benefit Filament?
Great question. As we've said several times, we have a quite a large and rapidly growing academic and philanthropic research supply partnership. We provide our study drugs either for free or for a reasonable low cost to leading researchers all around the world. We do this for, again, a number of reasons. One is, more research benefits everybody, right? Everybody in the space. So we believe in rising the tide for all boats, ourselves included. Number two is to give back to the psychedelic research community. We didn't exactly invent the idea of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. That's an idea that's been around, and ours and every other company in the space is leveraging a lot of research that's been done for decades. And so providing drugs and all the regulatory support that goes with it, we think is a kind of a meaningful way to give back to the research community. But more on the kind of business side, when we provide our drug candidates to these other researchers, we build the database of known human exposures to our drugs. And that's valuable for two reasons. One is we collect safety data. So when we go to apply for approval for our own drug, we can have a relatively large safety database. That makes it more convincing to get approval, and also may help you cut down the size of some of your later stage clinical trial if you already have a few thousand people that have been dosed with your drug. So that's number one. Number two is we get to see how our drugs work in new indications that we may not study on our own. For an example, some researchers are planning to study our drug in the field of coma, right? That's probably not an area where we would look into, but if they do and they find some good results, we actually have the rights to use that data. We can't publish it because that's what the researchers want to do, but we can take the data from their study and use it to make further applications for trials and approval for our drugs. So those are the reasons why we do it. It's a program we're very proud of, and also we're proud of the fact that many of the leading, if not all of the leading research groups globally have been reaching out to secure psilocybin from us.
Great. Okay. We have a question through the chat. Microdoses are currently being marketed in the black market, yet in storefronts. Is this an area that Filament would enter once it's legalized?
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot, is what's your opinion on the openly operating storefronts, especially in Vancouver? Look, obviously we believe in psilocybin, and so the more ways people can have access, the better. For the moment, we obviously can't participate in that market because we do everything all buttoned up and legal and boring. We do actually have a microdosing product. We have our psilocybin is available for research in 1 milligram and 5 milligram capsules. Were psilocybin legal, like cannabis? Yeah, we would actively be selling that. But for now, all we can do is research. We have a number of clinical studies through the academic partnership network of different groups that are studying our microdosing product, and there's obviously a lot of interest in further study in that regard.
All right, and then we had a question regarding ibogaine. I saw yesterday's announcement regarding ibogaine. Can you clarify what this means for Filament?
Yeah, so working with a network of different partners, we were very excited to announce the receipt of Nagoya Protocol compliant iboga root from Gabon. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, with many of these psychedelic or any botanical raw materials that are further processed into drugs, we always have to be very concerned about the sustainability of the supply. And if there's any traditional knowledge that's being borrowed, used, or incorporated in any way, there needs to be a mechanism of sharing the benefits of that traditional knowledge back with the people from whence it came. And the Nagoya Protocol is an international protocol that was set up to govern just this: the sustainable sourcing and the equitable sharing of profits or benefits back to the people where the original material and knowledge was sourced. And so over the last few years, the people in Gabon, where the Iboga root it comes from, have been working on the first Nagoya Protocol compliant supply. And we were fortunate enough, like I said, to work with some partners to actually get that shipment here in the lab. And so we've been working on developing a botanical drug standardized in ibogaine, but also containing all of the other secondary metabolites as well. Ibogaine is already quite widely used in different clinics around the world as a treatment for opioid use disorder. It's known to be a relatively risky treatment. There are health risks associated with consuming ibogaine, but nonetheless, it seems to have a really, really high potential to help many, many people. So the other interesting thing about ibogaine is that the chemical compound itself is very, very complex, and probably too complex to make through synthesis. And so natural extraction is really the way to do it. So we're quite excited about the ibogaine project and the Iboga project in general for a number of reasons.
All right. And I think that is the end of our questions. Yeah, we're all set.
Okay, well, if those are all the questions, if we're finished filtering in, we're obviously available anytime in the future to reach out on an individual basis. And we're always happy to host people who are local here in Vancouver for a tour of our facility. With that, I guess well, I'd like to thank everyone for their time. We had a really good turnout today. And again, thank you all very much for your interest and your support of Filament. Lots of exciting things still to come, and obviously very proud of all the accomplishments today. Thank you so much.